Welcome, anime fans and the anime curious, to Where There's a Weeb, There's a Way, a podcast series in which a seasoned otaku and a newbie attempt to put together an anime canon. We're going to be taking a look at some of the most influential shows and films, along with some more modern curiosities to help break a newcomer into the medium. We're your hosts, Grace and Chris.
Welcome, listeners and denzins of Amestris. And today, for the second episode of Where There's a Weeb, There's a Way, I'm introducing Grace to the wild and varied and wonderful world of Fullmetal Alchemist, known locally in Japan as Hagane no Renkinjutsu Shi. Do you ever go repeating that?
Hagane no Renkinjutsu Shi.
Hey, you got it, yeah. So Fullmetal Alchemist, as anyone knows who's in the know about anime or manga, will understand that Fullmetal Alchemist is, without a doubt, one of the most beloved anime series, manga series of all time. Its influence and narrative ambitions are, I think, well known to pretty much like anyone who's in the know. I'd even argue there's a little bit of overlap into non-anime fandom as well. It's, as a series, its influence and characters can just be felt all over the place. It's the archetypal shonen, but at the same time it's not an archetypal shonen, which I think kind of makes it a great series to introduce someone to who's just getting into anime. It is almost like the poster child for introducing someone who's new to anime, because the story beats are so recognisable, the characters are so wonderfully written, the world is clear. It does a great way of introducing like shonen fights and powers and battles, and I've seen it before. You know, I saw it in the midst of the internet, like in the mid.
How old were you when you watched this?
Oh God, I don't know. Maybe like 14, maybe. I used to like download the original series, Fullmetal Alchemist. You know, pre-Brotherhood, while the manga was still going on. I used to download the episodes of this series off like a really, really like dodgy anime website, which I think is probably how most people probably watched it during this time period, because DVDs were expensive and, you know, it wasn't all widely available, obviously not like it is now. So yeah, so I first watched Fullmetal Alchemist in the mid-2000s with my brother on the internet. It's a series that I've always been fond of. I always think of fondly, even when I wasn't really watching anime. I'd kind of give a bit of a defence to Fullmetal Alchemist. And its follow-up movie as well, which we watched as part of this as well, and we will be discussing today, the Conqueror of Shamballa, the follow-up film to the series, which I think is a lot better than the reputation that kind of precedes it. You know, people think Fullmetal Alchemist movies are mostly trash, which I don't really agree with. Well, I only agree with it when it comes to the last two Fullmetal Alchemist movies, but Conqueror of Shamballa I think is good, and because it's so intrinsic to like enjoying the series as a whole. Then we also watched the Conqueror of Shamballa as like a follow-up series. Mm-hmm. So. Yes, I mean, did you know? What did you know about? I mean, we tried watching Fullmetal Alchemist a few years ago with Brotherhood.
Yes.
And now, those of you listening are probably thinking, Chris, so why did you go with the original series? And I have a very, very good reason for that, which we'll explore as part of this episode. So yeah, so before watching the 2003 series, what did you know about Fullmetal Alchemist?
I knew the basic premise, that it was about two brothers who had tried to resurrect their dead mum, and it had gone very, very wrong for them.
人は何かの犠牲なしに何も得ることはできない。何かを得るためには同等の代価が必要になる。それが錬金術における等価交換の原則だ。 その頃僕らはそれが世界の真実だと信じていた。
Yes, he goes horribly wrong.
Yeah.
And they spend the series basically trying to find a way to get their bodies back. It's a very, very simple premise, but one which allows for lots of exploration of the character, the world, and all the different elements which come into like a serialized shonen series. So Fullmetal Alchemist, despite being a shonen, was not published in the annals of Shonen Jump magazine, making it a bit of a weird outlier. It was actually published first of all in Enix's monthly manga magazine between the years of 2001 and 2003, Enix being most famous for the creators of the Dragon Quest series. And then following the merger between Squaresoft and Enix, when it became Square Enix, the series continued being published monthly, as opposed to weekly, in the annals of Square Enix's monthly manga magazine. Magazine was called Monthly Shonen Gangan. So the manga was illustrated and written by a female mangaka, which is quite unusual in the genre of shonen. Arakawa Hiromu Sensei, as we're going to call her. So I think Arakawa's artistry, I think her line work is amazing. The attention to detail on the characters is brilliant. But better yet, because of like the way that it was published monthly as opposed to weekly, there's a really high attention to detail and there's a real concentration to Fullmetal Alchemist, which, you know, lots of the other popular shonen manga series I don't really get. They end up rambling or going on like maybe like a little bit too long. They get a bit long in the tooth. You know, I'd argue that only really One Piece is the only one which has kind of mastered that long form storytelling. But I think Fullmetal Alchemist has like a bit like an unsullied nature to it. The fact that it took quite a while for it to be all released and the deliberate pace and the fact that it was a monthly series basically meant that Arakawa could really take the time to flesh out the story and tell the complete thing. Now, a slight issue with this is that the series was only 2 years young when Bones Animation Studio, who are quite famous, you know, Bones went on to animate the later Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood TV series, and they're probably well known now for doing My Hero Academia, which is probably like the most popular thing they're doing at the moment. So this was like a really early kind of big series for Bones. So the Fullmetal Alchemist TV series began airing in 2003 and finished airing in 2004, lasting for 51 episodes of an incomplete series, which puts Fullmetal Alchemist in a very interesting position. I can't remember exactly what the facts are, but like out of the 51 episodes, only like 17 episodes of the series follow the manga.
Wow.
Which is interesting. And you're probably wondering, why are you starting off with this series? People in the know will know that Fullmetal Alchemist has a follow-up series, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which was basically began airing just as the manga was kind of wrapping up and finishing, and Brotherhood contains the entire story. It's the whole arc, it's the entire manga series. The 2003 series famously stops about halfway through adapting the manga and goes off and tells its own unique story for the final part of the series. Why would you want to introduce this series first? Well, I've got a couple of reasons. So, number one reason is that Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, in my opinion, while a brilliant series, does a pretty poor job at setting up the world to a newcomer. As we found out several years ago when I first tried breaking you into anime, when we sat down, I think we might have watched Yuri on Ice together.
Yeah.
I think when that was coming out, we were like, okay, cool, what other anime can we watch? And we tried watching Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. I'd seen it before. I loved it.
And I was like, what's going on? Who's that?
Yeah.
What?
Because
Nanny?
Nanny, yeah. So for reasons we'll explore when we get to Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood it builds its premise on you knowing the world of Fullmetal Alchemist. You've either read the manga or that you have watched the then fairly recent 2003 series, so you understand the setup of the world and you understand who the characters are. So you don't need to do a lot of legwork to basically get people to understand the premise of the show and how alchemy works and all this sort of stuff. Which, when we watched these both, because we will watch both these series back to back, we'll be talking about Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood in the next episode of Where There's a Weeb, There's a Way. They actually work really well as a back-to-back sort of thing, like a lot better than I imagined it Weber would do. But if you watch it in isolation, and I know people who are completely new to Fullmetal Alchemist, who started off with Brotherhood, most of the common stories I've heard aired is, well, I really loved the show, but I had a hard time getting into it. Mm-hmm. Because it really glosses over a lot of the character development, a lot of the world building, and some of the key episodes. My second point is, in my opinion, I think the 2003 series is better. Now, I realised that when we were watching it, I said I think Brotherhood's better, but upon reflection, I prefer the 2003 series.
That's fair. That is fair.
I think it's a case of which series, because both series has a problem, and they happen on different ends of the series. Brotherhood's problem is the opening, and the 2003 series is the ending. Now, I would argue personally that a bad beginning can more affect a series overall, while a bad ending you can write off, well, I enjoyed the journey. Yeah. Now, I don't think the ending of 2003 is bad. In fact, I think the actual final episode of the series, the final couple episodes of the series are really quite brilliant. It's just kind of a bit of a rush to the finish line is kind of the problem. And I think the Conqueror of Shamballa movie does quite a lot to make up for some of the issues in the ending. But I think in 2003, compared to Brotherhood, there is better direction. I think the animation's it's as good as Brotherhood, I think, but I think there's a certain artistry to the line work and the way the story plays out, and I just think the direction overall is superior. I think, you compare, the Nina episode, for example, to, I won't go into spoilers here, but you compare the Nina episode to the way it's done in Brotherhood, and it hits so much harder. So, when I say I prefer the 2003 series, it's by a smidgen. Literally, just by a smidgen. I really dig the depressing tone of the 2003 series more than Brotherhood, where, the 2003 series is just so relentless. Now, Brotherhood's a more complete experience, but to get there, I think you have to watch the 2003 series.
Absolutely. I think I would not recommend watching one of these shows without the other, personally.
Yeah.
I think, it was 100% worth watching them both. You will have a fantastic time with both shows. You should watch this, and then you should watch Brotherhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think both are still worth watching. In some fans' eyes, the 2003 series is now rendered irrelevant, which just makes me a bit sad.
Yeah, I completely disagree with that idea. I think it's 100% worth watching it.
Yeah, exactly, because there's great individual episodes, there's really fun little moments and great little arcs that they do, which are exclusive to the anime series. The nature of how the homunculus are handled, who are key characters, are also really different. I think a lot more interesting, I think, in the 2003 series. And don't get me wrong, there's elements where I think Brotherhood absolutely smashes it and just knocks the 2003 series out of the park, but if I had to put a hand on heart, which one I prefer, my brain tells me Brotherhood's better, but my heart says 2003 is my preferred one. I can't quite explain it. Maybe it's nostalgia, because it was such an early anime for me to watch. But I really dig this series, and I think if you're going to introduce someone to anime at some point, and you want to introduce them to shonen stuff, which is the most popular stuff, at some point you are going to have to grapple with Fullmetal Alchemist. And I think because it is, both adaptations are imperfect in their own way, but taken as a whole, the two of them together, I think you can have a really good time with both series. And we'll talk about the 2003 series in this episode, and then we'll get into Brotherhood a little bit more.
Next time.
Quite a lot more in the next episode, where we talk about how Brotherhood carries on the torch of 2003. But for now, we're going to talk about the 2003 series. So another reason why this is a really important series to watch is that it's a one of the really early anime series that really broke in the West. Like, you know, that anime could be a lot more than kind of the stuff that the West was getting. You know, it's
Pokemon.
Yeah, but it was on the one end of the scale Pokemon, and then on the other end of the scale something like the ultra-violent like Akira. You know, like there's two narratives to like anime in the 90s, which was kind of like the stuff for children, and then the stuff more violent, more grown-up adults. And neither are, of course, wrong about invalidating any of them, because at some point we are going to have to watch Akira, which I'm very curious about your opinion of that, because I hold Akira up as being one of the greatest films of all time. But with that narrative in the 90s, there was that kind of mixture of, you know, children's anime and then kind of more adult-orientated anime that was kind of being imported from Japan to the West. Fullmetal Alchemist was one which kind of falls in a bit of the middle. You know, it's definitely more... It's recognisably like a grown-up version of a lot of the anime that was being released for children, which I think is why it kind of appealed to me so much, where, like, it felt like a grown-up version of, like, you know, a lot of the shonen stuff I was watching. Like a grown-up version of Dragon Ball, basically, you know, with more ideas, and it's a bit darker. But on the other hand, I think it also could appeal to an adult audience for precisely that reason, where there is this tone to 2003, this kind of dark tone, which rides for all out, where it's so thoroughly miserable. I'd forgotten how miserable the 2003 series is.
It is like being punched in the feels over and over
continually,
again. Yeah.
You know, so it's a very tricky one, and yeah. So talking about it in that context, Fullmetal Alchemist kind of hit at that kind of peak moment when they were really starting to bring a lot of anime to the West and trying to not legitimize it, but get people to kind of look to it and basically say, look, you know, there is something to this medium and it's worth your attention. You know, it felt like a prestige series, and it was one of those great early dubs by Funimation. I'd argue that a huge part of the continued popularity of Fullmetal Alchemist is due to how much of a good job they did with the dub in 2003. Now, obviously, I'm not a fan of, like, all the voices in the dub, and this is something that's great to comment on because we've only watched the Japanese version, but, you know, like, despite all the stuff that's happened to him since, and this has got no bearing on what's happened to this person since, but I'm personally not a big fan of Vic Mignogna as Ed.
There, you see, Al, she's not scared. She likes you, right?
Me neither.
I don't think he suits. I don't think his voice suits the character model.
I think he sounds a little bit too mature.
He sounds too mature. Give me. I think the voice actress is called Romy Park.
Yeah.
Who voiced Ed in the Japanese version.
And she's great.
She's great. She's so good. She's great in the original series, and she's great in Brotherhood as well. Like, I'm assuming she's a she. I think she is a she.
She is a she. Yeah.
I didn't want to assume. But then conversely, outside of that, you know, having a choice of having an actual child voice, Al, is a great choice, and I think Al's really good in the dub. And then obviously you've got paragons of American voice acting, Travis Willingham and Laura Bailey as Roy Mustang and Lust respectively. I think they smash it. Really great early talent. There's also great early talent in the Funimation dub, which I think I really, really like, and it's so cool seeing how their careers have, like, developed since then. You know, like, I always knew Travis Willingham as, you know, the voice of Roy Mustang. He was just Roy Mustang for the longest time until, you know, fairly recently, and you see the breadth of his work and what he's done since. And you got all sorts of different other young voice actors who are involved in Funimation and kind of that pushing of Funimation as like an early dubbing house. So I just want to get out of the way and say, you know, because it was something to clarify as well for you, because since this series is still kind of getting going, I guess, I'm not opposed to dubs. If anything, I really, really respect voice actors, because it is a hard job. It's really hard trying to act and embody the character, but then being limited by the number of mouth movements on screen. It's a very, very hard thing to do. So yeah, so if there is like a dub which I think is worth watching, I will always say it. I think dubs get a bad reputation. There's a lot of gatekeeping involved, which I'm not fond of. So if you want to watch it, Fullmetal Alchemist in English, then knock yourself out. I think it's really good. Except for Ed, who's personally not entirely my... I don't think it really matches the character model, and I just prefer the Japanese voice actor infinitely. So if there's any English dubs which I've watched and I want to have a comment on, then I will say something. But for the most part, unless I specify otherwise, we will be watching these in the original Japanese. Not out of like a gatekeepy thing. I personally just prefer it for anime.
I like the sound of Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. Anyway, I've talked loads so far. So great. So how about you give us a rundown on the premise of Fullmetal Alchemist?
Okay, well, this show, it's about two brothers, Edward and Alphonse Elric, and they are 10 and 11 years old when their mum dies, and they're already quite proficient in alchemy, which in this universe, how would we describe what alchemy is in this universe? It's
Well, basically, it's the idea of breaking matter down and turning that matter into something new. The world is predicated on the concept of toka, which
equivalent exchange.
Which is you give something of equal value to get something of equal value in return.
It's science magic.
It's science magic, basically. Yeah. Like there's like. It doesn't always make sense. I think if I have to point to any slight issue I have with Fullmetal Alchemist as like a series, I think
it's that it's scientifically incorrect.
Well, it's because stuff like with using the masterwork of Shonen as a comparison, like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where the stands are quite clear, like in how they work. I think there's like basically, I think if they had to get into explaining like how the alchemy works in the series, the action scene would have to just stop.
Yeah.
So it's better just to go along for the ride, even if it doesn't always make 100 sense.
I mean, me personally, I'm like, it's fantasy, sure, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea is that Ed would take some water, for example, and then throw it at someone and turn it into steam, for example, and burns their face. It's using a product of equal value to get something of equal value in return, basically.
So they try to use alchemy to resurrect their dead mum, and you're not supposed to do this, and it turns out because Ed loses his leg and Al disintegrates, Ed manages to save his soul by binding it to a suit of armour that's in the basement where they're doing this. He has to sacrifice an arm to do this, so he's down two limbs, and Al is he's a soul embodying a suit of armour, so he can't eat or sleep or it would suck. So they are basically on a mission for this series to find the Philosopher's Stone, which they believe will be able to help them get back what they've lost.
It's a classic story of want versus need. They want the Philosopher's Stone, but what they need is personal redemption for the horrible act they committed.
I mean, they were children.
Yeah.
They missed their mum.
But the whole series about them trying to morally atone for what they did. They feel like it's a it's a terrible act, and all this is done against a backdrop of a nation at war, the Amestris, rather intentionally, as we kind of find out in the movie, is meant to be quite reflective of Nazi Germany. They've got a Führer. They literally have a Führer who's in charge of running the country, and Ed basically to get better at alchemy and to get access to bigger secrets of alchemy, basically becomes a state alchemist, which basically gives you unlimited resources to keep on studying alchemy, because only a certain few people in the world can use alchemy. Becoming a state alchemist is a license to keep on experimenting, having unlimited funding for what you want to do. There's different alchemists who specialise in different areas, but it's also a license to sell your soul to the military. So in times of war, they call upon the state alchemists to basically fight in battles, which in the very, very recent history of the series, there was a long and extremely bloody war called the Ishbal War, which basically is kind of like the backdrop to the series, is that there's this bitterness between the Ishbalians, who were basically genocide wiped out which I've got no doubt is Arakawa's way of commenting on the atrocities that happened in the Second World War with the Holocaust, but then also kind of like bringing it to the modern day, where I do think the series like unintentionally ended up reflecting in 2003 what was going on with like the Iraq War. You know, because the Ishbalians are kind of like they live like in a very hot country. It's very deserty, and I've got no doubt that there is a lot of parallels there with kind of what was going on in Iraq at the time, which I think is another reason why the series resonated the way that it did. And also what I really like about the series is that, like, you know, many of the characters are soldiers, they're state alchemists, and you like a lot of them, you know, you really, really like a lot of these characters, but the series doesn't shy away from the horrible acts many of them committed in the series. If this was the real world, they would probably have to be taken to justice.
Yeah, they are war criminals.
They're war criminals, yeah.
And this doesn't go uncommented on.
Yeah.
I think they maybe go into it a bit more in Brotherhood, but they do explore it here too.
Yeah, they definitely explore it here more, which I think is reflecting a lot of the characters. So one of the interesting things about the series is that they have almost like they obviously have the same cast of characters, but the takes on each character are ever so slightly different, which I think is really interesting for like a comparison piece to each other. And I think it kind of comes down to almost like personal preference, really, on kind of which interpretation you like. I think there are some who are clearly better in the 2003 series, but then I also think there are some who are clearly better in Brotherhood. You know, Brotherhood benefits from a much wider cast of characters, you know, of which we'll discuss a bit more when we get to Brotherhood. But yeah, so there's this, so against this backdrop of this conflict and of state alchemists and all this sort of stuff, and like this military leader who's getting more and more powerful, you've got Ed and Al who are on their adventure to find the Philosopher's Stone, which is a sacred, you know, like a secret of alchemy, which can basically let alchemists ignore the rules of equivalent exchange. You don't need to give something of equal value, and they hope by finding the Philosopher's Stone, that's the key to basically getting their bodies back.
Mm-hmm. So on that note, we should talk about some of the characters in this show.
Yes, we absolutely should.
Yeah, because there are quite a lot, so strap in.
In true shonen fashion, it's a massive cast. Even in 2003, it's a massive cast, and in Brotherhood it just gets even bigger. We'll get into them, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we should start off really with the man of the title, the Fullmetal Alchemist himself, Alphonse Elric.
I see what you did there.
No, of course no. We're talking about the older brother, who's also the shorter brother,
smaller, the
smaller brother, Edward Elric. Ed's great, and I think Ed's great in both series. I think I especially like in in Brotherhood, he's definitely given like the bigger arc, I guess.
Yeah.
Where like, you know, you see him go from being this cocky little shit into a mature, you know, like much more reserved sort of character. But he's a great way of getting you sucked in to the world. But of course, he's nothing without the other side of the coin, which is Alphonse Elric, Al.
Al is a cinnamon roll, and he is also my son, and I would also die for him too.
Yeah, it's almost like it made possible to like dislike Al. Like I could get people like disliking Ed because like he's a cocky little shit.
Yeah, I could, but also nah.
Yeah, and they complement each other really, really well. Like, you know, they're definitely one of my all-time favorite like sibling relationships in pretty much anything.
Definitely,
you know, novels, TV shows, film, video games. Definitely were one of my favorite sibling relationships. I think the 03 series does it a bit better. I think doing them together, I think is a little bit better in 03, because so many of the early episodes of 03 really do concentrate on their relationship. I want to make sure you understand their relationship, which, since Brotherhood glosses over so much of the opening, it means you do miss out a little bit on their relationship.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're very different. They've got very different temperaments. Al's kind of like a gentle giant in this suit of armor. Ed is small and angry all the time. And they complement each other very well.
Yeah. They're great protagonists to have, like, on the on the adventure, and whenever they kind of get into the realms of them feeling like down or whatever, they're always there to pick each other back up. There's a great episode where I don't know, they go to a warehouse. It's a whole series of events, and Al basically walks away having an existential crisis. Is he actually a soul, or is he just a constructed soul made by Ed?
Yeah. He's wondering, was he ever a real boy?
Was he ever a real boy? Yeah, and it's heartbreaking to say the least.
Yeah.
But the series kind of gets into that quite a lot, kind of like the psychology of both characters and what this all means for them. And there's almost like a strive to just keep on trying. Even at like their lowest points, they always have a desire to keep on going and keep on striving for something. And whenever one kind of goes off course, they're always there for each other, which, if that's the big theme of the series, of the 03 series, is that the Elric brothers have to rely on each other to get through the harsh, cold, dark world, while Brotherhood is a bit more about how you have to rely on others to help you get through. And I think both works fine. I think I ultimately prefer the feeling of Brotherhood, where you have to open yourself up to other people to help you get through life.
I think, I don't know, in a lot of things that are aimed at children and teenagers, adults are often, incompetent, maybe well-meaning, but children have to rely on themselves. And that's definitely not it with Brotherhood. The adults around them are generally competent and well-meaning.
Yeah, I mean, I think the adults in 03 are I think they are competent, but they're definitely adults, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They don't really necessarily feel like the emotional equals to Ed and Al.
They're kind of, a lot of the time they're busy with their own stuff. They have their own, and the goals don't always really align.
Yeah. Which is different, but I suppose that does take us on to a lot of the adult characters. But I guess we'll group them by, the State Alchemists first of all.
Okay. So number 1, State Alchemist, my bae, Roy Mustang.
Roy Mustang.
大総統についた暁には全軍の女性をミニスカートにする
definitely one of the definitely one of the most popular characters out of this show. If you're into, and everyone loves Roy Mustang. He's a great character. And this is one where he's characterised very differently in 03 compared to Brotherhood. In 03, they really, I think, play up the traumatised...
The PTSD.
The PTSD of him a lot more. Which, I think it just depends on which you prefer more. I think the PTSD in 03 makes him, a bit more interesting. But he's definitely a lot more, cavalier in Brotherhood. Which is different. But in 03, he's a bit more miserable, he's a bit more down. Still does cool things, but, not quite to the degree that you kind of find in Brotherhood. I think Brotherhood's one where, ultimately, while I really, really like the portrayal of Mustang in 03, I do think in Brotherhood he is slightly more interesting. He does a lot more in 03. Some of the other State Alchemists, the beloved Alex Louis Armstrong.
の剛腕の錬金術師アレックス・ルイ
Yes.
Who I remember when he turned up in one episode, I said to you, "This is my favourite character."
I was like, what?
This guy,
This
really?
guy?
Really?
Because he just looked, mostly apart from the silly little hair twirl, he looked like a generic strong guy.
I mean, he is a strong guy.
He is a strong guy, but he's not generic.
No, he's insane.
He's always flexing out of his shirt and
very flamboyant.
He's very flamboyant.
Yeah.
He's big displays of emotion. You know, there's no toxic masculinity with Major Armstrong.
Yeah, they're definitely not. Yeah. And then there's Risa Hawkeye, who's like Roy Mustang's.
She's a lieutenant.
Lieutenant.
She's his right hand woman, I guess,
Yes.
and she is not a state alchemist, but she is a brilliant sharpshooter, as her name would suggest.
Yeah. Whoever came up with that naming for her, must have predicted what she was going to become when she was older.
She's very no nonsense, very competent.
Yeah.
I think there will be more to say about her in Brotherhood.
Yeah. Because she's in like 03 and she does cool things in 03, but I do think narratively she comes into her own a lot more in Brotherhood.
Yeah.
But someone who does I think benefit more in 03 is Maze Hughes.
Yes, I would completely agree.
ちなみにこれが今年3つになったうちの娘だ
where Hughes is like, I love the push pull of the character. He is a goofy. He's a goofy new dad who loves his daughter and wants to show pictures of his daughter to everyone he meets. He loves her so much, but then he'll have moments where he gets like super serious, and you can kind of see that there's a real intelligence and deception, like kind of like what he's doing. And that's given a lot more room to breathe in 03. You really understand his character a lot more in 03.
I think he's also given more of a relationship with the Elric brothers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Like they've spent time together, and you really get to know this character like really, really well. I think they're the main state alchemists we want to talk about, right?
Well, Hughes and Reza, not state alchemists.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But the main military
military
characters.
Yeah.
So I think maybe next we should talk about Winry.
といい縁飾りといいまさに職人の技で仕掛けは手巻きそれとも自動巻きひょっとしてああな気にしたことないけど
Yeah, so like Winry is a character who I've always struggled with a little bit, especially more in Brotherhood, where like I think in Brotherhood they do the best they can with the fact that Winry is ultimately a stay-at-home mechanic.
Yeah.
I understand that practically the Winry. Okay, so just to context here, so Winry is basically a childhood friend of the Elrics. They grew up together, kind of like the surrogate, guardian figure, I guess. She's like the older sister, who ends up falling in love with Ed, but
You made it sound weird.
It sounds so weird, yeah.
Yeah.
But she looks after them. She keeps an eye out on them. She's like the emotional anchor for them. She says I can't remember if it's in 03 or in Brotherhood, but she says if you two brothers aren't going to cry, then I will.
I think she says it in both actually.
Yeah. But she's like the emotional crux basically for the Elrics, but she does spend quite a lot of the manga / Brotherhood not really participating in stuff. I said she's a stay-at-home mechanic, and I think they do okay with her. Like in Brotherhood, but I kind of prefer her in 03.
I agree, actually. I think I like her in both.
I like her in both, yeah.
But I do think, I don't know, she maybe gets a bit more involved in 03.
She definitely gets a bit more involved in 03, and she has a really cute friendship with Sheska.
Yeah.
Who's like she's like a librarian who becomes part of the military through a series of circumstances, and
Sheska, actually, just to go on a bit of a tangent here, Sheska is not a very big character, but she's the character who I relate to most because she as Chris just said, she works at a library, and she got fired from her job at the library because she read books all day long, and if that doesn't sound like the kind of thing I would do, I don't know what does.
So, like, Sheska has, like, a part to play, like, in Brotherhood, but it's nowhere near as big as it is in 03, where in 03 they really evolve quite a bit, and I think it's something that's definitely missing, because we really play off of each other in 03, and I think that relationship, is sorely missing. It gives Winry someone to talk to who's not Ed or Al. And
Or her grandma.
Or her grandma, yeah. But, you know, like... they go to antics, it's very funny, but so going back to Winry, you know, Winry joins them on adventures and stuff, and I just prefer her in this series. Like, I think she has got a bit more to do, and they managed to circumnavigate the fact that she is a stay-at-home mechanic. She's basically there to help when Ed's metal arm gets messed up, she's there to repair it.
Yeah, and she gets extremely salty about this. It's very funny.
Yeah, it's very funny. Yeah, but yeah, she's just giving that a little bit more to do, which I like and I appreciate. And I think in general, Arakawa's female characters are all well written, well drawn. You know, like, there's some fan service, but it's extremely limited.
Compared to a lot of other anime.
Compared to some of the anime, which we started watching, like, you know, but they could have gone a lot worse with Winry and a lot of the other female characters, and they keep it to a minimum, which is good. And speaking of someone who I do think is once again better in 03, is Izumi.
Oh, interesting.
Who is Ed and Al's alchemy teacher. She basically teaches them all about alchemy. I prefer Izumi in 03. I think she's given more to do. I think they characterise her a bit better. They spend a lot more time with her. And yeah, she's got, like, importance to the plot, like, later on in Brotherhood, but I think the fact that you spend a bit more time with her in 03. That
is true. I love her either way. She's actually one of my favourite characters in either series. Izumi is their alchemy teacher. She's actually the person who taught them alchemy. She always introduces herself that she is a housewife, and that's it. And this is really funny because she is so badass and so intimidating and just very, very cool woman. Yeah, she's great. Yeah, and she's got a really sad backstory, which we won't get into here. Maybe in the spoiler section we'll talk a bit about that. But she's great.
Yeah, and I think probably the last character who I'll mention, who I think is better in 03 compared to Brotherhood, I think Scar's better in 03.
Okay.
I think Scar's got a more complete character arc in 03. So Scar is an Ishbalian, a bitter Ishbalian from the war, who's basically kind of got like this arm, which it's a little bit weird in the 03 series. I think the arm's a little bit weird of like how he gets it in 03, but in Brotherhood it's basically through his brother's reading of alchemy, which is like an alternative version to alchemy. But yeah, Scar is a terrorist, basically. Well, he is. Like,
he's a serial killer.
He's a serial killer. He basically turns up in Central, which is like the main hub of the world, and starts killing state alchemists in response to their involvement in the genocide of Ishbalian people. And Scar is really great in 03. I think he's much more interesting. You know, they have ultimately the arcs are done the same. You know. Starts off as a serial killer, learns and kind of goes being a bit more of a respectful person. You know, you can make change in a slightly different way. And I suppose narratively it's more satisfying in Brotherhood, but I like how in 03 how they never really get on the same footing as each other.
I mean, that's fair.
You know, and I think what happens to Scar in the end, I think it's so much more tragic, and I think just completes his character arc in a really nice way, without getting too much into spoilers, but I think he's much more intimidating. You know, he's when I was like, 14 or whatever, like he was like a scary character when you first meet him, like legit intimidating, and you don't really know how you feel about him.
Yeah, he's trying to kill our beloved protagonists.
He's trying to kill our protagonists, and he messes them up, and I think Scar's got a definitely much more of a complete character arc in 03, which is a little bit more satisfying, even if like narratively it makes a bit more sense where he ends up in Brotherhood. Then what you think about?
I don't know, I might disagree a little on that one as well, but we'll get into that, I guess, when we talk about Brotherhood next time. Yeah.
So then I suppose now we might as well talk about the villains of Fullmetal Alchemist, who are the Homunculus. One of my all-time favourite...
Homunculi,
yeah, not homunculus, yeah, but the homunculi, who are probably like my all-time favourite gaggle of villains in a series. I think they're so great.
Yes.
The designs are so cool. They do such dastardly evil things, like, you know, they're just great. So in 03, as Ed and Al start travelling around the world, they have repeat encounters with these characters who reveal themselves to be homunculi, who are basically
embodiments of the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah, so each one is a different deadly sin. You've got greed, who's like
greedy.
Who's greedy. He wants women, money, booze in the world, and he's also great. And you've got gluttony, who's like, you know, the fat short one who eats people. You've got lust, who's kind of
sexy
but
scary lady.
Yeah. I mean, you got envy. Who's like the little shit equivalent.
Yeah. Confession time. I actually think envy is weirdly sexy. I'm not sure why. I think it's the character design is very androgynous. And it's, you know, quite, you know, muscular, but wearing like a tank top and a mini skirt. No quite work envy out, but we probably go to very vague, so we'll just... Yeah, that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
Non-binary icon envy.
Yeah. Envy's really good. And then you also have wrath, pride, and sloth, but we'll get into them in the spoiler section.
Which is coming up soon.
It's coming up pretty soon, yeah. So the homunculi are also looking for the Philosopher's Stone as well. For what reasons, we're not entirely sure, but they are also looking for the Philosopher's Stone as well, and seem to be involved in people who are making discoveries about the Philosopher's Stone or have a connection to the Philosopher's Stone. So you know, like we'll get into a bit more in the spoiler section, but like as a whole, I think the homunculi are really great. They're really fun villains. They have you keep guessing. They have really interesting origins. They're just wonderful.
Okay, so I think the last thing we should talk about before we get into spoilers is some of the arcs, and I think some of the things that, aside from the second half, that are different to the manga. And I think a big thing that I actually really like in this series is they do change the timeline from the manga.
Yeah, they're doing it.
So the first... Well, no, we have an opening two-parter, which kind of sets up the world and the main characters, and then I feel the next maybe 9 or so episodes are like an extended flashback, which start with the failed resurrection and take them all the way back up to the present day, which I actually liked them doing it this way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It really helps you to understand exactly who they are right from the start, and I always enjoy that certain satisfaction of like a series that's been told through like flashback and then you kind of reach to the present day.
Yeah,
I find that oddly satisfying.
Also, there's certain something that happens, which we are again going to talk about soon. It's that much sadder for it happening when they're 11 and 12, I think.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like some of the early stuff which the series does in the first few episodes, dozen or so episodes, first 2 dozen episodes or so, there's lots of like really strong individual episodes.
Yeah.
Which I really like. There's a couple duds, but for the most part, they're all at least good. You know, like I really like the other Elric brothers two-parter.
Yeah.
Which is, I believe, based on one of the light novels, but in which Ed and Al travel to a town and they discover that there is another pair of brothers who are posing as the Elric brothers to get access to like a laboratory and stuff, and you find out what they're getting up to. I really like that two-parter. I think it's really, really good. Any individual ones from that?
Well, I mean, it happens closer to the halfway point, but before things split. I really like the episode where they are... Izumi puts them on an island for a month, and it flashes back to her putting them on the same island when they were little. And the reason I like this episode, it's just really cute.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's really cute. They're little kids. They're so cute. I also really like the one where Ed and Roy have a duel.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's a classic episode. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of little ones like that. Lots of just really good little individual episodes, which I think for the most part work really well. It's like, you know, people will accuse it of being filler, but I'm like, you know, it's. I think filler can be good.
I think if I enjoy it, then it was worth it.
Yeah, exactly. Because but what filler often is in, you know, to explain to people who don't know what filler is, but you know, it's essentially an episode which doesn't have any bearing on the main story. It's basically there just to fill the time kind of thing. So there'll be no consequence on the main story. It's literally just there as just to fill the gap, and it's often used in more long form anime productions to basically let the manga artist catch up and you know, produce more story for them to adapt. So it really affects shows like Bleach and especially Naruto and especially One Piece, where they have to let the respective manga artists catch up, do more story, and then while it's going on, they'll do a random arc, which is like a random filler arc, which for the most part people hate, and filler's got a really bad reputation. For the most part, understandably, because especially like in stuff like One Piece, like some of the filler's pretty bad, or especially Naruto, some of the filler's pretty bad. But in the context of Fullmetal Alchemist, I think because they're doing it as just a set 51 episodes, I think the episodes which are originals or based on light novels, I think work. I think they really contribute to building the world. You know, they do serve a purpose outside of this is just a random Ed and Al adventure. They do feel like complete parts of the series, you know. And, you know, like I like my individual episodes in TV shows. I think it's a bit of a lost art, to be honest, I think, in the age of, like, serialised television, you know. I like the idea of having a complete little story like in 20 minutes or 45 minutes, you know. So yeah, no, so then obviously the series kind of continues roughly following the manga with his diversions up until about the halfway point, and then from the halfway point it goes off and starts telling its own story, completely separate to the rest of the series. It's completely different, and yeah.
Yeah. So with that in mind, it's probably time to talk about spoilers.
Yeah. Alright, yeah, so just as a quick summation, if you want to stop listening here, then that's fine.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Go and watch it.
Yeah, like I say, if you've not seen Fullmetal Alchemist, and you're kind of just getting into anime, I would highly recommend you watch the 03 series first before watching Brotherhood. It'll help really give some context to the world and the characters, and then you can enjoy the full story and experience then if I get into Brotherhood. And outside of just the practical reasons, I think there's so much artistry and great direction and wonderful music and well-written episodes and scenes. There's more than enough reasons to go and watch Fullmetal Alchemist, the original series, and then following it up with the movie Conqueror of Shamballa, which is, again, a lot better than its reputation that kind of precedes it, but we'll definitely have to talk about that a bit more in the spoiler section, because the whole thing's a spoiler, basically. The whole movie's predicated on...
yeah, you can't even talk about any of it.
Yeah, you really can't talk about any of it if you've not seen the original series. So, yeah, if you've not seen it, it's great, you know, go seek it out.
Make sure you have tissues.
Yeah, tissues at hand. But yeah, I guess we'll talk about spoilers.
Yeah. So, I feel like maybe the first thing to talk about is Nina Tucker.
Yeah. So so you read any article about the 03 series and it'll go like something along the lines of stick with it, and then it gets to a certain episode, and that certain episode that pretty much all the writers say is the Nina episode.
Yeah.
Which is where, the first few episodes of Fullmetal Alchemist are kind of fun and breezy, but with a hint of darkness to them because of the character's backstory. But you get the idea that they're on this kind of fun adventure together. And then the Nina Tucker episode hits, and it completely derails that. And things are going to be a lot darker from here on out. Basically, Nina is a character who basically, I guess, lives with the Elway brothers for a bit.
Yeah, they while Ed is studying to take the alchemy, the state alchemist exam, they live with her and her dad.
Yeah.
Show Tucker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's a, well, they call him the Sewing Life Alchemist, which I find pretty funny because Sewing Life, I think it sounds like a title of like one of those magazines your mum has in a bathroom. Oh. But in his case, it's because he works with it's more like biological stuff, doing things with animals and transmuting them into something else. Yeah, so
he's kind of famous for in the context of the world for making the first chimera that can speak. And this is what I love about this little arc, where there's a lot of, like, again, when you first get into the series, you get the impression that state alchemists, they're kind of these ultra cool, ultra powerful forces within the world and stuff. And, they're great archetypal shonen characters. But then the Show Tucker / Nina Tucker little arc that happens is where you learn that there is a much darker side to state alchemists and the military and the government, where state alchemists have to reapply every single year for their funding and for where they live, and if they can't prove that their research is paying off, then state alchemists can have all their titles stripped away and they have to go and get normal jobs. I don't know, Show Tucker has to go work as a barista or something. I don't know. So stuff hasn't been going too well for Show Tucker. Things haven't been working out too great recently. His experiments aren't really working. His wife has left him.
Apparently.
And yeah, things are not looking too good. And things aren't looking too good for him successfully reapplying to be a state alchemist. This is around the time where Ed and Al kind of come to live with him. And then Ed and Al, over the course of a few episodes, form a relationship with Show Tucker's daughter, Nina, who's like a cute little girl.
She's 6. She has a big dog.
A big dog.
Called Alexander.
Alexander, yeah.
I believe, and they are very close.
Yeah, and so you have several episodes building up their relationship until the episode where Show Tucker's exam comes up. The Elric brothers come back one day from doing stuff, and they find Nina and Alexander are missing. And as it turns out, Show Tucker has transmutated his daughter and his dog into one horrifying being.
They can only really kind of say a few words and is clearly in horrible pain.
Yeah. It's horrifying.
It is a traumatic episode.
Yeah. And it's really where Fullmetal Alchemist begins to earn its legendary status as a series that's no holds barred. It's traumatic, it's terrifying, and it adds this layer then to the state alchemists and to the military and to the government of this is what someone's had to do to keep a form of authority. Someone's been essentially, it felt like they've had to do this thing to keep their livelihood going, which is just horrible. Yeah, so it's a morbid but really well directed episode. I think you only need to compare it to Brotherhood to see that the direction in 03 is infinitely better in nearly every aspect. The colouring, the lighting, the way the camera holds on Ed's realisation of what has happened is just it's horrifying. The animation's great. So that's a really great early little arc there, and I think a sign that Fullmetal Alchemist is much more than your standard shonen fare. And I think the Nina thing traumatises them. I think they get into the trauma a lot more 03 than in Brotherhood.
Yeah, I know maybe everybody's just better at masking their pain in Brotherhood.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
But in 03, it's something that we struggle with right up until the very end. Like, it's a haunting spectre to Ed now that we couldn't save one little girl. So it's it's a great episode, but it's very hard watching. I mean, from there, Fig spiral for the Elric brothers into a depressing cycle of pain, which just continues throughout the entire series.
So the next big traumatic, there were probably more, but I feel like the next one we have to talk about is Maze Hughes dying. Yeah.
So Hughes starts to cotton on that there's something up with this government. They're up to bad things, and he starts to investigate, and he gets a bit too far. And in true 70 conspiracy theorist style, people start hunting him down, and eventually he's shot in the middle of a park.
In a phone booth.
Basically on the phone, trying to get in touch with his best mate Roy to communicate that there's this great mystery that he's discovered, that the military may have involvement in producing Philosopher's Stones. So that's a whole thing, and then you have a really sad funeral scene for Hughes, and it's
the funeral scene it's really hard to watch. Actually, it gets a little bit too hit because his little girl is there, and she's asking why they're burying her daddy, and he won't like it. He has to go to work in the morning. It gets a little too real.
It's hard watching, definitely.
The next thing, I think we should talk about the homunculi in a little more depth.
Oh yeah, that was fine. Yeah. So the series gets to a halfway point, and it diverges from the manga. And the diversion point happens basically when Ed and Al meet a young boy who we later learn is actually a homunculi called...
Homunculus.
Oh yeah, because it's an individual, meets a homunculus called Raph. I love Raph. Raph is I think Raph is great. Like, I think Raph is really sorely missing in 03.
I do, because I know, you even though you feel sorry for him on
I feel really sorry for Raph, yeah.
And so Raph is, as it turns out, he is, in a strange, roundabout way, he is Izumi's son.
Yeah, which is the big difference between the homunculus. So the homunculi in Fullmetal Alchemist 03 compared to Brotherhood, where in Brotherhood the homunculi are the embodiment of the emotions of the villain father. In 03, the homunculi are basically the products of failed human transmutations. So they were, in another life, they were people. They were people who lived their lives and then might have died. And then through failed human transmutation, they're given effectively like a new life. And they're taken in by the villain of the series, Dante, who kind of appears in the last few episodes. It's definitely one of the weaker aspects of the series, but the slightly changed nature of a homunculi in 03 I think is really interesting, and is why I think this series is partly worth watching, because of the doorway of them being former people, it opens up the potential for backstory stuff. So I think Lust in 03 is much better, where she has a backstory and you understand who she used to be, and then starts questioning the ideology that she's been indoctrinated with by becoming a homunculus. And you see the same thing happening with Raph as well, where Raph is like this scared, confused kid who's completely taken in by and indoctrinated basically into this weird, warped world which the villain Dante is trying to create, where she's trying to make a Philosopher's Stone for herself to keep herself living for decades and decades, but the homunculi kind of do it in the hope of... she basically promises, Dante the villain promises to the homunculi that, you know, if you keep searching the world for Philosopher's Stones, I will turn you back into human, which gives them a motivation which is ever so slightly different, and a bit better, in my opinion, to the way they are in Brotherhood.
Yeah, I think the homunculi are pretty much just evil in Brotherhood. In this, they you know, they're still, on the whole, pretty evil, but they you can understand, you can kind of see why they're doing this and understand it from their perspective.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, there's certainly homunculi who I think are better in Brotherhood. I think Envy's better in Brotherhood.
Yeah.
Envy's got a much more complete character in Brotherhood, and definitely would have been slightly more weirdly sadder fates. I think Greed is better in Brotherhood.
Definitely.
We'll get into that when we get there. But I think for the other half, I think Lust is much more interesting.
Yeah.
And Sloth is a bit more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so Sloth is, of course, as as you might expect, Sloth is actually the result of Ed and Al's failed human transmutation.
So subsequently, she looks like their mum.
Their mum, yeah.
She doesn't really do any slothy things.
Yeah, I think that's maybe my beef with this aspect of of this part of the show, is that you understand why Wrath is Wrath, and you understand why Lust is Lust. I'm not sure why Sloth is Sloth, or because
she doesn't really do any slothy things.
Yeah, and she wasn't made out of laziness, so does Dante just randomly assign a
I would assume so, yeah.
just randomly assign a sin to each one. You're Sloth now. Wait, why am I Sloth? We don't have one, so off you go.
It doesn't really make too much sense of that aspect.
Yeah. But I do really like the almost Frankensteinian ness of the idea that humans have created these things and then kind of abandoned them.
Yeah.
And, each one is literally a character's sin that they've left on the world.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea, yeah. So then, just to round it off as well, then the last homunculus is Pride, who in a plot twist turns out to be Fiora King Bradley. It's a little bit weird to like how Fiora King Bradley becomes Pride in this version. I think he's much better in Brotherhood.
Yeah. Where
he's actually... It's a whole thing, and we'll get there when we get there, but... he's basically Wrath in Brotherhood. But he's still really good. Like, it's still a really good twist when you find out that Fiora King Bradley is a homunculus. I think that's really cool.
And I'll admit, I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, there you go, yeah. Now, admittedly, I think it's better handled in Brotherhood. And there is, of course, a homunculus who is not in 03, and that is 03's version of Pride. Who is different. But
we'll talk about
Pride when we get there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they changed the nature of the homunculi in a really interesting way. It doesn't make a whole lot of narrative sense, and it's in service of a villain who's introduced like a little bit too late into the series for my liking.
Yeah.
Because we realise that we need to wrap this thing up. But I still think they're really interesting. It's an interesting counterpoint to what happens in Brotherhood. So I'd say we mentioned Dante briefly, who turns out to be the villain, who's only really introduced in the final few episodes. She had a relationship with Ed and Al's dad, who I've not really mentioned so far because he's so inconsequential to 03.
Yeah.
He's almost not worth talking about until we get to Brotherhood, where I think he is vastly superior.
Better, yeah.
So it's with that then that I guess we get on to the
ending?
The ending, which is the most controversial aspect of 03. I think it's low-key brilliant.
Yeah, I am a fan.
So, as it turns out, the alchemy that powers... So I think we're one of the best... Backtrack it a little bit. So 03 basically... I think it firmly establishes that Ed and Al would be so much better if they didn't have alchemy in their lives.
Yeah, it's not really helped them in the long run. That's how they got into this mess. So.
And there's one of the things that forces like the thematic thread of 03 quite well is that this great power has just destroyed so many people. There's always like a hubristic fall involved in having alchemy. Roy Mustang, a young man who wants to become the leader of the world, is destroyed emotionally by his involvement in the Ishbalian conflict. Or you've got the villain, you've got some of the more evil members of the State Alchemists, like Kimberly, for example, who Kimberly is like a completely insane. He's the Crimson Alchemist.
Yeah, he can explode people.
Yeah, he's terrifying.
He turns people into bombs.
Yeah, it's
messed up.
He's horrible.
Yeah.
So I think if we firmly establish, I mean, obviously then the tragedy of Ed and Al is caused by them wanting to seek more alchemist knowledge. So I think the series is, whether intentional or not, basically does a good job at establishing that Ed and Al would be so much better if they did not have alchemy in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Which is ultimately the conclusion that Brotherhood also reaches.
Yeah.
To a certain point. But we'll get there when we get there. So, through a series of circumstances, I still don't quite understand everything that happens in the ending.
Yeah.
And that's having watched this series, over the last 20 years or so. Ed and Al have a conflict with Dante, who's revealed to be the true villain of all this thing. She's basically using the homunculi to basically go out into the world and try and produce a Philosopher's Stone to keep her life essence going for longer. She basically jumps from body to body, and she's been around for centuries and centuries. So they have a conflict where it basically pushes off to the front. Through a series of circumstances, through some weird alchemy stuff, Ed ends up in our world.
Because that is what is on the other side of the gate of truth in this in this version of the story. It's our world. I think it's around 1914. So
I think so, yeah. But the history is kind of weird because they're doing like the Blitz of London, which is definitely more like a World War II thing. But I think they do set it in in 1910s. So yeah, so Ed wakes up with his dad in Blitz London.
I remember I was just, what the
yeah.
when I saw this.
But basically, in 03, the worlds work as like a two sides of the same coin kind of thing. So in one world you've got our world, and all the conflicts and all the people that die basically go into Amestris, onto this other world, and that's basically what helps to power alchemy. The idea being that a Philosopher's Stone is basically made by dead souls, by souls of dead people, basically. So all the souls are basically feeding from our world into the world of Fullmetal Alchemist, and they're drawing upon those dead souls to basically use alchemy, which is messed up.
Yeah.
But interesting. I really like that as an idea. The kind of the suffering in one world is eking into like another world. I think that's like really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Even if the episodes don't quite have enough time to explore the full implications of that. So when that happened, what was your reaction?
What the fuck, man? What the fuck? I was really, my brain was running to try and catch up with what was going on, but once it got there, I was like, no, you know what? This is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Ultimately, to get Al's body back, Ed has to stay in the alternative. Well, not the alternative world, but like in our world. Ed has to stay. And
Al is returned to his 10-year-old body. He has lost all of his memories of... Yeah.
So there's like a bittersweet tragedy at the end of 03 where the brothers are separated, but spiritually they'll always be connected.
Yeah,
which is narratively a frustrating place to finish it, but I think thematically I think it's okay. But yeah, narratively it's quite frustrating to leave it on that note.
Yeah, I mean I would not have been satisfied if there was nothing else. I would have been so upset.
Yeah, and I can only imagine what it must have been like at the time.
Yeah.
But that's where we get on to the follow-up movie, the Fullmetal Alchemist, Conqueror of Shamballa, which was released in 2005. A theatrically released movie, which I think is pretty good. I
also think it's pretty good. I had great fun watching it.
It's really fun. Like, it's a wild ride. So they sort the timeline aspect out. Like, I think maybe they hadn't quite done the historical research right and realised that maybe Blitz London wasn't in the 1910s. So they update it, so it's basically set... or you could interpret it as maybe the timeline works slightly differently, and maybe Ed ends up in this place. But the film basically establishes that Ed has now lived in our world for a little bit now. He's tried to make as good of a life as possible for himself in 1930s Munich, in the lead up to Hitler taking over as leader of the National Socialist Party. And what's kind of cool about the film is that in the alternative reality, there are alternative versions of the characters that we know and love from the series. So I guess through familial connections, Ed hooks up with our world equivalent of Al, who obviously doesn't. He bears some resemblance to Al, but he's a different character.
Yeah.
So basically, Ed's becoming a bit of like a. I don't know what it'd be. Maybe like an early inventor, I guess. Like a Nikola Tesla type. I guess that's kind of what Ed kind of becomes. He's basically helping our world equivalent of Al basically build rockets and stuff. And I think the setup's really cool. I think it's really interesting. But then in Amestris, Al, who has kind of lost his memories, is basically trying to find a way of getting back to Ed.
Yeah, because he doesn't know for sure that Ed's alive, but he thinks he must be. So he's actually been training with Azumi because he had to relearn basically everything he learnt during the series, and he's now travelling around trying to find some trace of his brother.
Yeah. And through a series of circumstances, the proto-Nazis find a way of opening up a tear in time and space which will allow them to basically travel to Amestris and gain this mighty power that they think is there, which is alchemy. And they do it through a whole series of complicated circumstances involving Envy turning into a dragon and stuff, and basically they're building a transmutation circle to form almost like a hole between realities. And it's up to Ed and Al, conversely, to stop them and save the day, and maybe for Ed to get back to his world. And yeah, no, I mean, this movie has a bit of a reputation of like not being good or satisfying, but I don't know, I kind of disagree. Like,
yeah, I felt more satisfied with the ending of this than I did with if it had just ended with the series.
Yeah. I think the animation's really good.
Yeah.
The animation's gorgeous. I think the plot is interesting. I think the setting's interesting. You meet all the our world equivalents of. We meet a lot of our world equivalents of the characters we know and love, only in different contexts.
Yeah.
Including meeting Maze Hughes, who dun, is a member of the National Socialist Party, which was a surprise.
Yeah.
And then, Ed takes part, in the Munich beer hall riot that happened, which is a real historical event, and anime Hitler turns up at one point.
It's wild, man.
I really like it. I really enjoyed it. I had a really fun time watching Conqueror of Shamballa. It's ridiculous in all the right ways, but it takes itself seriously at the same time. There's a villain in it, but she's ultimately inconsequential. I said she's like a proto-Nazi who wants to go to this other world and seize this power that she suspects is there. But compared to the other two Fullmetal Alchemist movies, one of which I've seen, the other one of which I've heard nothing but bad things, Conqueror of Shamballa is above and away the best Fullmetal Alchemist movie out of the three which exist. And it's I said it ultimately is for me a satisfying ending to 03, the continuation of a lot of the thematic threads which run through 03, and ultimately ends with, through a series of circumstances, Ed has to stay in our world, and Al decides to go with him, and they subsequently lose their connection to alchemy. Which, I like that. I like that ending. It ultimately goes back to the whole thing of equivalent exchange. You can't get something for nothing. And I think it's a good ending, and I think Ed and Al would do very well in our world. They're very, very bright young men.
Yeah.
But just have to watch out for them.
The only concerning part is World War II is going to happen soon.
We just have to watch out for them Nazis, and they're also hanging out with Romani people as well, which obviously history, obviously things didn't turn out to, great for Romani people during then. But again, what I like about the film is that it does get into the plight of the Romani people and a lot of the prejudice that they faced during World War II. I obviously continue to face now, but I think especially during this historical time where a lot of the persecution that they faced at the hands of Nazi Germany, it's often a forgotten about it's a forgotten about genocide, definitely, and I think the film handles it in as sensitive as a way as possible that shonen anime sequel can do. It's fine, you know.
I think there's a really nice scene where Ed actually asks the main Romani character what actually she would prefer to be called. Like, as in, what is the correct term? Because people in that movie are throwing around the word ***y, which obviously these days...
It's a racial slur,
so he asks what the actual term is, which is you know, pretty nice.
I think that's pretty nice,
yeah. You know, for a movie made back, I think, kind of before we really got into that the same way we do now.
Yeah, it did, definitely, yeah. If it feels like ahead of its time, it did that aspect.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I mean, I think if people go back and give Conqueror of Shamballa another go, I think they'll find a satisfying ending to the series.
I mean, if nothing else, you'll have fun.
You'll have fun. I had a lot of fun. Despite being set before World War II, there being mention of Romani genocide, and Maze Hughes being a member of the National Socialist Party, if you can get past all that, then it is actually a really fun movie that has lots to recommend about it. A lot better than the reputation that kind of precedes it. And yeah, then that ends the 03 iteration of Fullmetal Alchemist. And it wasn't too long after Conqueror of Shamballa, 4 years later, where they went back and they did Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. So, yeah, we're almost there now, you know. It's been a bit of a long one, this now, but a new section before we kind of summarise our thoughts on the series as a whole. I thought it'd be really fun to talk about openings. Openings are, of course, a staple of anime TV shows. Sometimes the openings are better than the actual shows themselves. They're great. You know, they're an art form unto themselves, you know, like fitting in 90 seconds of storytelling through visuals and through music and through editing, I think is something which anime openings do really wonderfully well, you know. And Fullmetal Alchemist is famous for its openings, you know. All 4 openings of the original series are iconic as hell. People really love them. And I thought it'd be really fun just to talk about them. And maybe to start doing that going forward as well. And I suggested we do a ranking list, starting from our least favourite, working up to our most favourite of the Fullmetal Alchemist openings. Alright, so we've got 4 openings for Fullmetal Alchemist. So I guess we'll start with you first. What was your least favourite?
I think my least favourite, although I did like it, was Undo.
Yeah, I agree, yeah. I think the song for Undo, I like the song. Yeah. But I think the opening itself is a bit meh.
Yeah, it's not as energised as some of the others. But you know, it's a good song. I like the bit where they fight a snake.
That bit's cool, yeah. And Ed like slices it in half. You know? I love that bit of animation. Yeah, it's really cool. Because that's something as well when we talk about opening. It's not just like liking the song. It's also like the song in combination with the opening like itself, which might be a bit of a problem for one of my favourite Brotherhood openings, but we'll get there when we get there. All right. So number 3 then.
Number 3, I would go with Melissa, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. I think our list is going to be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would also go with Melissa, who is done by Porno Graffiti.
Yeah.
I like Melissa. I think Melissa's a good song. There's a nice, it's a nice sing-along one. But I think the opening itself is a bit lacking. Yeah,
it's... I mostly remember they're on a train. There's a bit on a train.
Well, all I remember is there's about a 15-20 second moment, which is a long time in an opening, where there's like a 3D animated thing like the mountains. I mean, the camera just sails through the mountains for a bit. Okay. And it's a bit like, oh, come on, you know. You can do a bit more with this, but the song itself, I like.
It's good. It's got
very iconic.
Got a very nostalgic feel almost, which is a strange thing to say about an anime I watched like a month ago.
I'm gonna say it's nostalgic for me because like I watched it, you know, about 15 years ago, but yeah.
But you know, we've come so far.
We've come so far. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. All right, number 2.
Number 2. Oh, it's hard actually.
I know what my number 1 is.
Yeah, I think I think I would go with rewrite here.
Yeah, I'm going with rewrite as well.
Oh, okay. I thought you would go the other way. But...
My memory of Fullmetal Alchemist was rewrite was my favourite song. Was my favourite opening. And I think I slightly prefer rewrite as a song to album 1.
Okay.
But the opening is very... It's slow, it's a bit more sedatory. I don't think it quite matches the rhythm of the song. Yeah. The only part where it does match the rhythm of the song is that kick-ass fight where...
In the water.
Yeah. Like, the animation is just so good there. It's so gorgeous. And, like, if you look at it, it's the best Fullmetal Alchemist has ever looked in terms of, like, the animation. The song itself I really love, where Asian Kung Fu Generation, I've done a few anime openings and, they're a really good band, I think.
Yeah, I also, I'm just kind of amusing in this one that there's a shot of everybody looking depressed.
Yes.
Which is fitting for this anime, but...
Definitely. I mean, like, I think for, like, the slower, more melancholy opening, I think the 5th opening of Brotherhood's better in that aspect, Amewa. Like, I think it's a lot more...
Yeah.
I think it matches the rhythm a lot more. Like, I think what they were trying to go for with Rewrite, I think they really master in Brotherhood's final opening. But we'll get there when we get there. Alright, so our number... This is a pretty boring list because, they're exactly the same. But
yeah.
Our number 1 then is, by process of elimination, is Ready, Steady, Go by L'Arc-en-Ciel. I don't know how you pronounce that, but great song.
Yeah.
And just a great opening by itself. I think it marks a key point in Fullmetal Alchemist where the series is starting to click. Mm-hmm. And it hits like a freight train, and... some great English as well, like...
it's really good, really energetic.
So I think Ready, Steady, Go combines a very satisfying opening with a really good song as well. Like, it's kind of like a perfect combination. But anyway, so that was our first attempt at talking about openings, and our lists are exactly the same as each other. Alright, so we're 90 minutes into this recording.
Oh.
We must have talked about nearly every aspect about Fullmetal Alchemist one could think of. General thoughts and opinions.
Okay.
About the series.
Well, I loved it.
Yeah.
It stole my heart.
I've actually talked myself out of preferring it to Brotherhood, actually. Now,
oh my god, really?
The push, seriously, the push-pull between these two shows just really... I think... Alright, my ultimate opinion is Brotherhood is a more complete narrative experience and it's more satisfying in so many aspects. Going through and talking about each of the homunculus individually made me realise that, alright, cool, while I like Raph in 03, I think the way they do Raph in Brotherhood's better, Bradley's got more development, and, going down the list to think about all the elements, there's certain aspects which I definitely prefer in 03. I prefer the direction.
Okay.
I think the way the show is directed in 03 is better than Brotherhood, which for me, direction goes an extremely long way, which is why there is such a push-pull for me, even if narratively Brotherhood's more satisfying. In my ideal world, Brotherhood would have like an extra 15 episodes, plonk them at the start, and have the same director as 03 making it. With the same animation style, because I really like the updated animation in Brotherhood, but with the same director telling the complete version. But it puts Fullmetal Alchemist in an interesting position where there is no perfect version.
Yeah, I think these two shows they're almost symbiotic. Like, they play into each other so well.
Equivalent exchange. You can't have one...
Exactly.
You can't have one thing without the other.
Yeah.
You can't have characterised and a rich lust of 03 without having, lust in Brotherhood. You have to have both ultimately.
Yeah.
There is no perfect version of Fullmetal Alchemist.
Yeah.
In terms of like the adaptations, the manga, ultimately I think the manga is the best version of the story, like, because it just, there's certain things which 03 does well and certain Brotherhood does well. Overall, I think the manga is the best version, but it's close, like, it's really close.
It's really close. They're both brilliant, I think.
Because my push-pull of reasons why I keep going back and forth between which I prefer between 03 and Brotherhood is, because I think the direction is so strong in 03, and I think it's so thoroughly grim, and it's got such a consistent tone, which I just really respect. I really respect anything which can keep a consistent tone, even across like a 90-minute, 2-hour movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a hard thing to do, to keep that energy going over the course of like 51 episodes. There is just this great, just depressing tone to it, which I really like. But so I mean, obviously, your first time watching it all the way through. Did you think my experiment paid off?
Yes, I really found this super easy to get into.
That's always been the annoying thing for years, because I always had the suspicion that you'd really like Fullmetal Alchemist.
And you were right.
I was like, we tried several years ago with Brotherhood, and I realised then Brotherhood is a problem, and I thought, well, at some point we're going to have to go back and watch the original series, or try and convince us somehow to check it out. Because now the stage is set, you understand the world, you understand the characters, and then you can enjoy the encore, the 64 episode encore, which is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is the follow-up series released in 2009 by Bones, which we will talk about on the next episode of Where There's a Weeb, There's a Way. So as going to become customary on Where There's a Weeb, There's a Way, and each episode we will produce our live rankings of the series that we've watched so far. So far we've watched 2 series. So my number 1 is Fullmetal Alchemist 2003, and then number 2 is going to be Death Note, and I suspect that Death Note is going to continue to slide down the list.
Yeah, I same. That would be my rankings too.
Yeah. So at the moment, both mine and Grace's list are the same. Fullmetal Alchemist 03 is number 1. And Death Note is number 2, and I suspect they might be the same for a bit. Yeah. Until we get to maybe a little bit deeper, so you just have to stay with us.
Maybe you'll change your mind again.
Maybe I'll change my mind again
about whether you like Outta or Brotherhood more.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this. So we'll talk about Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood in the next episode, and then after that, we've got some a little bit different after that. I thought the next one after that should be a different sort of series.
We'll let you know about that next time.
Which happens to be presently my all-time favourite anime series. So look forward to whatever that could be when we get there. So next time, Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Thank you very much for listening to today's episode of Where There's a Weeb, There's a Way. If you like the show, make sure to like, rate and subscribe to us. You can follow us on Twitter @ThereWeeb, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time.